Thursday next week, the 146 school students fly out of Sydney for what could be the trip of their lives. For 16 days they'll play their way around England and be the talk of each town they visit. Today it was obvious that the months of practice had paid off. Organisers say they are delighted with the public response to the band's fundraising efforts. Although they'll be leaving with a small debt still owing on the expenses, they're confident that'll be paid off with a little work after the trip. After today, the instruments will be packed for transport to London, and the 106 girls and 40 boys will have a few days to think about what Thursday will bring. The final performance in England will be at the opening night of the Royal Tournament, and they'll all be back home on the 18th of July. The council has just 3 days left to remove the residents if it is to hold to its vow to empty the park by the end of the month. The council plans to relocate all vans for a period while the park is upgraded and then to allow only short-staying tourists back in. It's far from presenting a united face, however, and Alderman John Tate has openly lent his support to the residents. At today's meeting, Peter Barrack of Trades Hall Council also recommitted the backing of the union members, saying that if anyone was being evicted, they'd be there to make it physically impossible. Mr Barrack also hinted that others in the council may be reconsidering their stand on the park. He said in an address to the Labor Council on Thursday night, Alderman Dennis Nichols had recommended that the residents should stand firm, and he was optimistic that they wouldn't have to go. When contacted today, Alderman Nichols verified the report but would not comment further, saying the matter was still confidential. The Lord Mayor John McNaughton was also unavailable for comment.
"120 out of the Hunter's 150 lorry owner-drivers attended today's meeting, along with another 20 employees. They say the Transport Workers Union has threatened that if they don't join its superannuation fund, the truckies will be banned from loading or unloading at mine pits and wharves. A TWU representative spoke at the meeting but was given a hostile reception. Co-chairman of the meeting, John Farraher, says the TWU's directive is illegal and not on.
Many of the owner-drivers already have funds up and running. Many of the companies have funds up and running, and accordingly they wish to continue on that basis. And they don't want it to be dictated to as to whether they should join, an industry fund or not.
Is it standover tactics that you wouldn't expect from a union representing their own workers?
Yeah, well, it's certainly, it's unusual.
The meeting voted to continue its fight and join the scheme of its choice, as the Long Distance Transport Association did. It's union standover tactics like these by the TWU that Liberal candidate for Hunter, Graham Dunkley, who was also at the meeting, says a coalition government will stamp out.
Our government finds it insufferable that members of a union can be forced against their will by their own union to join either the union or the superannuation fund simply because it's the will of the union. The union should be working for, not against, their members. And our government will make sure that unions do not have the right to use these tactics. Everybody should be equal.
The proposed exchange would enable the council to obtain land to extend Cathedral Park, while the church would acquire council properties in Cooks Hill and land at New Lambton, both parcels, according to council, adding up to $450,000. Controversy arose last week when Alderman John Tate alleged that many of the council properties had been undervalued. Now the other side of the deal is also in question. Alderman Tate has issued a statement outlining what he says are glaring errors in the valuing of the church land. In the statement he says the valuer who assessed the land for the council put its worth at between $300,000 and $450,000, but believed it to be far closer to the lower figure. However, the council minute, which refers to the deal, states the value of the land is $450,000. Alderman Tate says the Valuer General records point to a much lower figure.
The certificate states that the value of that land in 1985, which is a current VG valuation, is $160,000. Now, I know VG valuations tend to be a lot lower than market values, but if you double the VG valuation, you come up with $320,000, which is very consistent with what the valuer found at $300,000.
Lord Mayor John McNaughton was today unavailable for comment.
Milbrodale is nestled in the Upper Hunter past Cessnock. The land has great historical significance, as shown through Aboriginal carvings. But yesterday, all attention was on the visiting petrol burners called off-roaders. Racing in 6 divisions, the dust flew from 1200 cc's to 4-wheel drives and V-dubs, featuring some of the state's best drivers and machinery. It's a sport that sparks the thrill of speed and skill in the open country, and one that gathers the locals. First outright winner of the event was Doug O'Connor and John Farrell of Cessnock in their buggy. O'Connor was also named Man of the Mountain.
Robertson is a Labor stronghold based on Gosford, firmly held by the Minister for Arts, Heritage and Environment, Barry Cohen. A swing in the vicinity of 10% among the 71,000 enrolled voters would be needed to unseat him. At the top of the House of Representatives ballot paper is Australian Democrat Glenys Griffiths, a high school teacher from Erina who has lived on the Central Coast for 10 of her 41 years, being involved with the Democrats since their inception. Glenys Griffiths is involved with service and sporting organisations, particularly pertaining to women. She has no false hopes about winning, but wants the Democrats' philosophies to be brought forward.
I feel that the Liberal and the Labor Party haven't provided the answers for the public, and that the Democrats do have something to offer. I think everybody can remember the mess that Malcolm Fraser and his Liberal Party made at the time, and I don't think that the Labor Party have made many improvements with their wooing of the big business. They've forgotten about the people, and the Democrats are really concerned about the people and the things that are worrying them.
Well, just how... Second on the ballot paper is the sitting ALP member Barry Cohen, who, at age 52, has held Robertson for the past 18 years. As well as being the Arts, Heritage and Environment Minister, Mr Cohen is also Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the bicentennial. Born at Griffith, Mr Cohen was educated in Sydney and is now married with 3 children. He believes the Hawke government can stand on its record.
We've had a government that's been very stable, recognises that it's handled the economy very well, gone through a very tough period in Australia where we as a government have had to cut back on expenditure in a way that perhaps traditional Labor governments didn't do. And we've reduced taxes. We're now in the process of reducing inflation and unemployment. And at a time when our balance of trade has been extremely bad, the worst we've experienced in 30 years, this government has been able to manage the economy very well. Now what you've got on the other hand is the Liberals coming up with this sort of fistful of dollars, as they did in 1977, and saying, look, we can really provide you with a big tax break, but not telling the other side of the coin, which is to do that, they have to cut back on basic services. Now, Australians have to ask themselves, do they want to destroy their education system? Do they want to destroy the welfare system? Do they want to see hundreds of thousands of people in poverty? Do they want to get rid of the health scheme, which is such a safety net for people who suffer illness, and take the fistful of dollars? I think they realise that we have kept expenditure to a minimum over the past 4 or 5 years, that we've really been quite savage in cutting back on unnecessary waste, and to now place at risk all that we've built up, but with an opposition that's offering them, you know, really to destroy the whole basis of our society to get a few extra dollars in the pocket. I don't think they'll buy it.
Something that the whole of the
The last position on the Robertson ballot paper is taken up by the Liberal candidate Paul St Clair. Mr St Clair, also aged 52, is a chartered accountant from Copacabana. He's married with 2 young boys. He says his practice has brought him in contact with small business people for over 30 years, and he specialises particularly in helping firms to get started. Paul St Clair has been a member of the Liberal Party for 25 years.
Australians have never been taxed so much, so heavily in the whole history of Australia. And just on that one score alone, Australians should think very deeply and accordingly should vote Liberal, because our policies offer them great hope in this respect.
As far as the electorate of Robertson is concerned, what do you see as the problems here and what could you do about it?
Well, the main problem I think here is that we've got a Member of Parliament who does virtually nothing in his electorate. And this is something that when I'm elected on the 11th of July, I will be doing plenty for this electorate. I will be seen in the suburbs at least one Saturday every month, talking to the people and spending time with them. I will always be available to talk to the people here.
Why do you think that the people should reject the Labor government in place of a Liberal government this time around?
The basic reason is because this country is heading in the wrong direction. It has accelerated over the last 3 years. And accordingly, a change has got to be made. It's got to be a dramatic change, otherwise we're going to end up as a banana republic. And we've got the policies for that change. Our policy is that initially we must create the incentive to increase the wheels of industry instead of having a shrinking economy as we've got right now.
So that's the contest in Robertson. Tomorrow night in the news, we come a little further north to Wyong to look at the electorate of Dobell.
Dr June Galvin will use the fellowship to assess the social, management and legal issues in the introduction of new technology overseas in the coal industry. On the subject of new technology, put on public show today for the first time was a locally engineered continuous miner with board roof bolting rigs. The new miner has increased productivity by 25 to 50% and is not only quicker but safer. The introduction of this new type of technology has caused problems in the Australian coal mining industry. Problems Dr Galvin hopes he'll be able to find answers to while he's on his 3-month study tour of Sweden, Germany and the United States.
The benefits that will result from this fellowship are threefold, 3 major benefits. The first one, which I hope to achieve to come from it, is improved human relations and attitudes towards new technology. I see that as one of the major benefits, but also resulting from optimising new technology, improving the success rate that we have with it. 2 other benefits that come out of it are improved productivity and cost, and it goes without saying that they improve our international competitiveness.
The tranquil South Pacific island of Fiji has been for years a favourite holiday destination for Australian tourists who want to get away from it all. However, 2 months ago the tranquility was shattered and tourists were caught in the middle of some of the worst violence to ever hit the country. A newly elected government was ousted by a military coup, and rioting and racial violence were an everyday occurrence. General Manager of Jays, Richard Pearson, has just returned from Fiji. He said the country's tourism-based economy suffered badly.
Occupancy fell from 95% to 10% in the travel industry.
But now Mr Pearson says it would be difficult to believe the coup had ever happened. Tourism, the island and its people have almost returned to normal, and it seems hunted travellers are already taking advantage.
There's no sign of any security there. There's no sign of the military or police presence. The shoppers are trading as normal, and everything's quite peaceful. With the introduction of the cheap airfares and accommodation rates, we are getting inundated with inquiries and finding it quite difficult to get through the tour operators.
Do you find that people are still worried about... Last year, 19-month-old Sam Scott was admitted to the Mater Hospital with meningitis. He was placed in intensive care, but after 48 hours his condition failed to improve. He slipped into a coma and was only saved because a microbiologist who examined his blood samples had a special interest in the bacteria and recognised that the strain was resistant. He was put onto different antibiotics and soon began to improve. Because Sam attended a daycare centre, nose and throat cultures had to be done on all the children and staff at the centre. 4 other children were found to be carrying the infection but were not ill. All the children at the centre were treated, and so were the families of those carrying the infection. The Deputy Director of the Intensive Care Unit, Dr Martin Rowley, says the resistant strain of the disease had probably been brought to Newcastle from Southeast Asia, where one of the families had recently visited.
Written this case
he says there were good reasons for recently writing up the case in a medical journal.
We wrote this up because this is the first report of this particular resistance pattern from within New South Wales, and we wanted to alert our medical colleagues to the possibility that when they treat this disease they may have a problem with resistant organism that they haven't previously encountered, and they may need to consider using the newer antibiotics to treat it with.
Okay.
Police say the semi was travelling north along the Pacific Highway just after 9 o'clock when the driver lost control on the slippery road near the Hexham Bridge. The trailer was carrying a load of book bindings when it overturned, spilling diesel across the road. Police say the 37-year-old driver miraculously escaped serious injury, suffering only abrasions and cuts to both hands. He was taken to the Mater Hospital. Northbound traffic was slowed down to 1 lane as police redirected vehicles. No other cars were involved in the accident. The Falcons began the match the young crowd's favourite, despite the unconvincing track record under new coach Owen Wells of losing the last 4 games played away from Newcastle. Although both teams compete in different leagues, the Falcons in the National Basketball League and the Hunters under the South Eastern League, last night's play was organised to help the local under-15 rugby league schoolboys team in raising funds. But there was no doubt that both sides were out to win. At half-time, the Falcons, tipped the stronger rival of the two, were struggling under the Hunters' lead of 55 to 50. But by full-time, with the help of American import Wayne McDaniels, the Falcons scored 9 points ahead with the final score 114 to 105. For the Park Royal Hunters, the game was a warm-up before 3 days of competition down south next weekend. And for the Falcons, Coach Wells hopes that winning feeling will stick around when they play their first home game under his care against the Canberra Cannons at Broadmeadow this Saturday night.
BHP had given forewarning that drastic cuts of this order were to be expected, and unions have shown understanding. A spokesman for BHP said the Saxon Vale colliery will now be run as a holding operation only. It will continue to be a marginal concern, only losing less money than before. The idea is to keep the complex from deteriorating until the world coal market improves. But BHP stresses that efficiency will still have to be increased. All coal mining in the north will cease on Thursday, when unionists will hold an aggregate meeting at Branxton. The combined mining unions will hear reports on the worsening district employment scene and the outcome of meetings being held in Sydney this evening between union officials and the federal and state resources ministers. They are discussing an announcement by the region's biggest coal company, Coal and Allied, that it will be cutting jobs at its 11 collieries in order to stay in business. Delegates from all northern mines will rally in Sydney on Wednesday outside the Joint Coal Board offices, where a hearing into the Coal and Allied plan will be held. Ray Block is well qualified to observe what's happening. He had 10 years' experience in the Department of Trade and then 20 years in the securities finance industry, and is constantly in demand, like today, to assess the state of the national economy. Mr. Block says, contrary to what politicians are asserting, Australia is in for tough times.
The Australian problem is far from over, that we've got to greatly expand our exports, well beyond the 1986-87 achievements. That the community has still got to consume less, it's got to save more. We've got to build up our manufacturing and tourism base well beyond the present levels. Australia is a long way from being out of the woods. We need a lot more belt tightening now. Now these are unpleasant messages. These are messages that no political party, no politician is addressing. But the reality is that the politicians who promise now, can they deliver? And what I'm saying is that over the next 3 years, there is going to be the belt tightening. Whether the politicians will accept that now, the reality is that people shouldn't be expecting that there are better times ahead.
BHP had given forewarning that drastic cuts of this order were to be expected, and unions have shown understanding. A spokesman for BHP said the Saxon Vale colliery will now be run as a holding operation only. It will continue to be a marginal concern, only losing less money than before. The idea is to keep the complex from deteriorating until the world coal market improves. But BHP stresses that efficiency will still have to be increased. All coal mining in the north will cease on Thursday, when unionists will hold an aggregate meeting at Branxton. The combined mining unions will hear reports on the worsening district employment scene and the outcome of meetings being held in Sydney this evening between union officials and the federal and state resources ministers. They are discussing an announcement by the region's biggest coal company, Coal and Allied, that it will be cutting jobs at its 11 collieries in order to stay in business. Delegates from all northern mines will rally in Sydney on Wednesday outside the Joint Coal Board offices, where a hearing into the Coal and Allied plan will be held.